Scene 1. The phone call. He came in at 20 after 4 with the Chevette carrying the smell of the plant, finishing compound and cutting oil, in his clothes and his hair and the fibers of the seat upholstery, a smell he had stopped being able to detect on himself 6 months into the job, and which other people could apparently still smell just fine. His mother had told him it wasn't bad. Quinn had never mentioned it. He figured the truth was somewhere between those two positions and closer to Quinn's. He came through the side door into the kitchen, and his mother was at the stove, and the kitchen smelled like pot roast, and the end of the afternoon, which was a better combination than finishing compound by any measure. "How was it?" Barbara said without turning. "Long." He set his lunch pail on the counter by the back door. "Henderson?" "Didn't call. Good." He washed his hands at the kitchen sink. The water ran grey off his palms. "Dad sleep through?" "Sleeping now. He came home at 6 this morning, ate breakfast, went straight up. She stirred something on the stove. He's got the late run again Thursday." He say anything about the bearings. He didn't say anything about the bearings because he knows if he starts talking about the bearings, I will be sitting here thinking about the bearings all night, and he does not do that to me. Michael dried his hands. Smart man. He has his moments. She reached for the pepper. "There's a message for you," by the phone in the hall. He looked at her back. She kept her attention on the stove. "Who from?" "Frank Harmon," she said. "At Ironwood. He'd like you to call him back when you get a chance." She said it with the particular care of a woman who had practiced saying it that way. Not flat, not strained, just measured. The careful placement of each word where it belonged, the way you placed your feet on ice. Michael stood at the kitchen sink with the dish towel still in his hands. He said, "Okay." He folded the dish towel and set it on the counter. He went out to the hall. The number was on a slip of paper beside the phone, his mother's handwriting, the 7 digits written in the clean block letters she used for anything she wanted to be legible. Frank Harmon, Ironwood, the number underneath. No other information, because there was no other information to record, and because Barbara Anderson was the kind of woman who wrote down what was asked, and nothing more. Michael looked at the slip for a long moment. He picked up the receiver and dialed. The number he had memorized in 1985 was still there, in whatever part of a person's memory held the things they had decided to hold. He did not need the slip. But he looked at his mother's handwriting anyway, the clean block letters, and dialed what was written rather than what he remembered. Because the two should have been the same thing, and he needed to confirm that they were. They were. The line rang once, it rang twice. Frank Harmon picked up on the third ring. Ironwood. Michael closed his eyes for half a second. 4 years since he'd heard that voice. 4 years and 1 month if he was counting, and he was not counting. He had been not counting the whole time. "Frank," he said. "It's Michael Anderson." There was a pause on the line. Not a long one. The pause of a man who had been waiting for this call and who was now deciding, in the small window of 3 seconds, how to begin. "Michael," Frank said, "I appreciate you calling back." "Yes, sir. You just get in from work?" "Just now." "How's the job treating you?" This was Frank. This was exactly Frank. 14 months on the finishing line, and the first thing he asked was the job. He was buying 2 minutes to read the voice, the same way he had bought 10 minutes looking at Michael across the lodge table in 1985 before he said anything that mattered. "Good," Michael said. "It's a good job." "Hartwell treating you right?" "Yes, sir. Made crew lead in January." A pause. "That's good," Frank said, and it landed like a real thing, not a pleasantry. "That's good, Michael." Then the pause stretched a little longer. Michael was quiet. He had learned in 1985 that Frank's pauses were not empty and you did not fill them. "I need you to come out to Ironwood," Frank said. "When you can. Soon." There it was. Michael stood in the hall with one hand on the receiver and the other hand flat against the wall, and he felt the floor shift under him in a way that had nothing to do with the floor. Not a physical thing, a settling, like weight redistributing. "Is it bad?" he said. "I'd rather have this conversation in person," Frank said. "Come out when you can. This week, if it's possible." Michael thought about the shifts. Wednesday off. Thursday early shift, done by 1:30. Robert was on nights, which meant the house would be quiet, which meant he didn't have to time it. Friday, he was back on. "I can do Thursday," he said. "I'm on an early shift. I can be there by 3. Thursday's fine." He was nodding before he caught himself nodding, the habit of agreeing to things before they were finished. He had always done that. He did not think it was the worst habit a person could have. "Frank," he said. "Yes." "Is it the same thing?" Another pause. This one had a different texture. "I'll explain what I can when you get here," Frank said. "Drive out Thursday. Come around 3 if you can make the time." Which was not a no. Michael stood in the hall with the receiver pressed to his ear and looked at the wall above the telephone table, which had a watercolor print of a covered bridge his mother had bought at a church sale 6 years ago and which he had never particularly looked at until this moment. "I'll be there at 3, he said. "I'll put the coffee on," Frank said. "All right." "Drive safe, Michael." "Yes, sir." The line went quiet. Michael held the receiver against his ear for a moment after the click. He could hear the soft static of the open line, and then the dial tone, and then nothing when he finally set it back in the cradle. He stood in the hall. The hall was exactly the same as it always was. The telephone table with his mother's handwriting on the slip, the watercolor print. The coat hooks to the left of the door with his father's jacket on the middle hook, and a spare umbrella on the right hook, and nothing else, because they were not people who kept things they were not using. The hall smelled like the house, the bread and clean smell of the place on Walnut Street that he had grown up in. That smell had been his idea of the word home for 12 years. He stood in it and looked at the slip of paper. Frank Harmon, Ironwood. He picked it up off the telephone table. He folded it once and put it in his shirt pocket. He went back to the kitchen. His mother was still at the stove. She did not ask. He did not say. He sat down at the kitchen table and picked up the newspaper his father had left there from this morning and opened it to the classified section the way he always did. Because the habit was the habit, and the habit was steadying, and he read the listings without absorbing a single word. The coffee mug in front of him had gone cold without his noticing. He sat with it and looked at the paper and thought about 4 years. About the drive home from Samantha's on Monday morning, with the window down and the fields running past and the country station out of Chillicothe playing something he couldn't name because he wasn't really listening, just needing the noise, and his hands on the wheel of Samantha's car, still feeling like they belonged to somebody else. He had shaken all the way down Maple Grove Road and onto the county highway, and he had stopped shaking somewhere around the Willow's Bend limit sign because he had decided to stop, and he had some practice at deciding things in his body. That had been 4 years and 1 month ago. "I'll put the coffee on," Frank had said. Michael sat at the kitchen table with the cold mug and the classified section he wasn't reading and thought about Thursday. Scene 2. Something wrong at home. Wednesday was his day off, and he spent the morning of it doing the things he did on Wednesday mornings, which was to say, he split wood for the Petersons, checked the gutters on the south side of his parents' house, where the bracket had been pulling loose since February, and drove out to the feed store on County Road 8 to pick up the bag of sunflower seed his mother used in the bird feeder off the back porch. These were not exciting activities. They were the activities of a Wednesday morning, and he had learned that there was a particular steadiness available in doing what a day called for, which was a thing his father had modelled without ever naming it. He was back at the house by 11:30. His mother was in the kitchen again, because his mother was often in the kitchen. Not out of any quality of confinement, but because she genuinely preferred it, and because the kitchen at the house on Walnut Street was a room that rewarded preference. He set the bag of sunflower seed by the back door, washed his hands, and sat down at the table. His mother put a cup of coffee in front of him without being asked. He wrapped his hands around it. "Thank you," he said. She sat down across from him with her own cup. They sat for a moment the way they sat when there was no particular agenda, which was comfortably. He and his mother had always been able to be quiet in the same room. He had gotten that from her, and he knew it. "You sleeping all right?" she said. He looked at his coffee. Well enough. You've had the lamp on past midnight 2 nights running. She did not say it as an accusation. She said it as a woman who was keeping track of information about her household and had determined that some of the information warranted mention. Reading, he said. What are you reading? He named the paperback on his nightstand, which was a Western he had been working through in 20-page increments for 3 weeks and had not advanced past the midpoint. His mother nodded and said nothing. He had the sense she was not entirely satisfied with this answer and was deciding whether to press it. She did not press it. She looked at her coffee cup instead. She turned it slightly, the way she turned things when she was thinking. I've been having a dream, she said. He kept his hands around his cup. He kept his face where it was. What kind of dream? He said. The same dream, every night since Friday. She looked up at him with the particular directness his mother brought to things she had decided to say. It's the yard. Our yard here. But it's nighttime, and there's something in it. I can't see it clearly. I can hear it moving in the grass along the fence line. She paused. I don't think it means anything. Dreams don't have to mean anything. I know that. When did it start? He said. She considered. Saturday. No, Friday night. The first time was Friday. Friday. 4 days ago. He had been out Thursday. The night before the dream started, he had been on the line at Hartwell. He said, Has it been waking you up? Once. The first night. After that, I seemed to sleep through it. I just remember it in the morning. She picked up her cup and set it down again without drinking. It's probably nothing. I notice when I keep having the same dream. It tends to mean something's on my mind, and I'd rather know what it is than not know. That's a reasonable way to be, he said. She looked at him. He looked back. Have you talked to Dad about it? He said. Something moved across her face. Small and quick and there. Your father has his own things, she said. He let this sit. He took a sip of his coffee. He said, What kind of things? Barbara Anderson looked at her son for a long moment. He had her eyes. She had told him that once when he was small, and he had gone and looked in the mirror afterward, seriously, trying to determine whether it was true. He still wasn't sure. He thought he had more of his father's jaw and more of her in the area around his eyes, but the exact division of a person's face was hard to read from the inside. He's been waking up early, she said, going out to the back porch, 2 nights in a row. He say why? He says he heard something in the yard. Michael set down his cup. He did it carefully, the way a person set down a cup when they needed their hands free, and also needed to appear to be doing nothing in particular. He looked at the surface of the table. There was a small mark near the edge where a pot had set too long without a trivet, years ago, and the mark had stayed. He had looked at that mark on this table for 12 years. What kind of something? He said. His mother was quiet for a moment. He said he thought it was an animal at first, along the fence line. She paused. He said the second time, last night, he went out and it was gone when he turned on the porch light. But he said the grass along the fence was... He said it looked like something had been standing there, in the same spot as the night before. The kitchen was very quiet. The coffee was cooling in his cup, and the bag of sunflower seed was by the back door, and somewhere upstairs his father was sleeping. The sleep of a man on 3rd shift who had been on his feet for 8 hours and had come home to a house where something was standing in the yard at night. Michael looked at his mother. She was looking at him the way she looked at him sometimes when she was reading something in his face that he had not intended to put there. Probably a coyote, he said. There was talk at the plant about coyotes coming closer to the subdivision limits. Henderson mentioned it. He did not know whether Henderson had mentioned it. Henderson talked about a lot of things. It was not outside the range of possibility. His mother nodded. She did not say she believed him. She did not say she didn't believe him. She picked up her coffee and drank and looked at the window over the sink, where the bird feeder was visible on its shepherd's hook in the side yard. A pair of house finches were working through the last of the old seed, the male bright as a warning against the grey April morning. I'll put the new seed out when we're done, Michael said. That would be good, she said. He sat with his coffee and kept his face easy, and his hands around the cup, and did not think, right now, about the fence line, about the grass pressed down in the same spot 2 nights running, about 3 nights of the same dream starting 4 days ago, which was the day after he had come home to find the slip of paper on the telephone table with his mother's careful handwriting on it. He did not think about any of that. He sat in his mother's kitchen and finished his coffee. He put the sunflower seed out. He checked the gutter bracket on the south side of the house, which needed a new screw where the old one had stripped out, and he went to the garage and found the right screw in his father's coffee can of miscellaneous hardware and fixed the bracket. He cleaned the gutters while he had the ladder up. He found a tennis ball up there that had been on the roof for God knew how long, grey and soft from weather, and he threw it in the trash. He put the ladder away. He stood in the side yard for a moment. The yard was the yard, square, tidy, the Walnut Street lots not large but kept up. The fence along the back was a standard cedar privacy fence his father had built in 1981, 6 feet high, the boards weathered grey in the way cedar went grey. The grass along the inside of the fence was the same grass as the rest of the yard, green in the way April grass was green, the colour of something just deciding to commit to the season. He walked to the fence line. He looked at the grass. He could not tell anything from looking at the grass. He was not Frank Harmon. He did not have whatever Frank Harmon had that let him read the ground the way another man read print. He crouched down and looked at the base of the fence and the grass near it, and what he saw was grass. No particular disturbance that he could read. But that was the thing. He didn't know how to read it. Not yet. He straightened up. He looked at the fence. He looked at the yard. He looked at the bird feeder, where the 2 house finches were still working, and then at the kitchen window, where his mother had been sitting. And he thought about the sightline. From the kitchen window, his mother could see the feeder and the near side of the yard and the left third of the fence. She could not see the right 2/3. She would not have seen anything moving along the fence from where she sat. His father would have gone out the back door, onto the porch, and the porch faced the yard directly. From the porch, his father could see the whole fence line. Michael stood in the side yard and looked at the fence, and thought about what his father had seen from the porch 2 nights in a row. He thought about Frank saying, "I'd rather have this conversation in person." He thought about his mother's hands around her cup, the small turn she gave it when she was thinking. He went inside. He did not say anything to his mother about the fence line. He helped her with the dishes, and ate lunch, and read his Western for 40 minutes, and did not advance past the midpoint. And he drove out to the Petersons in the afternoon to check that the wood he'd split was stacked right, and to make sure old Franklin Peterson's arm wasn't giving him grief again the way it had in February. The Petersons were fine. Franklin's arm was fine. His wife made Michael eat a piece of lemon cake before she'd let him leave. He ate it and drove home. His father was in the kitchen when he got back, up from sleeping and eating the breakfast for supper that had happened on 3rd shift weeks, eggs and toast and the morning newspaper, because Robert Anderson read the news in the order he encountered it, regardless of what time of day that was. He looked up when Michael came in. "How are the Petersons?" he said. "Good. Franklin's arm is better. His wife sent you this." He set a foil-wrapped piece of lemon cake on the table. "She said Franklin can't have it because of his sugar." His father considered the lemon cake. He pulled the foil back slightly and looked at it. "His sugar's been fine," Robert said. "She doesn't trust it. His sugar has been fine for 2 years. The man had 1 bad reading." He covered it back up. "I'll eat it before she calls to check." Michael pulled out a chair and sat down. His father pushed the newspaper toward him. He picked up the front section and looked at it and said, "The bearing situation gets sorted. Henderson authorized the part. It'll be in Friday." His father ate a bite of egg. "Should have been in February. February, you were telling him March." "I was telling him that because I knew how long he was going to take to authorize it." This was factory floor mathematics, and Michael knew it well. He nodded and read the front section headline without reading the article under it. His father ate. The kitchen was quiet in the way it was quiet in the evenings on 3rd shift weeks, a different quiet from the other weeks, slower. "Dad," Michael said. His father looked up. Michael kept his eyes on the newspaper. "Mom said you've been up early. Couple nights." His father was quiet for a moment. Michael heard the small sound of a fork set down. "She worries," Robert said. "I know she does." Michael turned a page he hadn't read. "She said you heard something in the yard." His father did not answer immediately. Michael looked up. Robert Anderson was looking at him. 53 years old, white-haired, the square jaw and the steady blue eyes and the dimples that had not gone away with age. He was looking at his son with a specific quality of attention that Michael recognized. He had seen it in his father's face in the kitchen, the morning after they had come down from the farmhouse in 1978, when Michael had been 10 years old and sitting at a neighbor's kitchen table with hot chocolate he couldn't taste, while his father stood in the doorway with his coat still on, looking at him with that exact quality of attention, reading him, measuring whether he was all right. His father was doing the same thing now, from the other direction, looking at Michael the way Michael had been looking at him. It was probably an animal, Robert said. The same thing Michael had told his mother. Michael said, "What kind of animal?" His father was quiet again. He picked up his fork and set it down again. "I went out the second night," Robert said. "It was gone when I put the porch light on, but before the light, before I hit the switch." He stopped. Michael waited. "It was standing," his father said, "the shape of it, whatever it was standing upright." He said it the way he said things he was not entirely certain he should say, carefully, in the way of a man who dealt in facts and was not confident about the classification of what he was reporting. Michael looked at his father. His father looked at him. "Coyotes can look strange in the dark," Michael said, "the way the light catches them." His father said, "Yes." He said it the way a man said yes when he was agreeing to move past something, rather than agreeing to the thing itself. Robert Anderson was not a man who was easily fooled. He had 40 years of factory floors, and the particular intelligence of a man who had learned to read machinery and people with the same set of skills, and Michael had inherited enough of that to recognize it when he saw it being withheld. His father picked up his fork and went back to his eggs, and Michael looked at the newspaper, and neither of them said anything else. The lemon cake sat on the table in its foil. The kitchen went on being the kitchen. Michael sat in it and kept his face where it belonged, and thought about Thursday. About the drive up Maple Grove Road. About Frank's voice on the phone, and what Frank had not said. He thought about the shape his father had seen in the yard, upright. In the same spot, 2 nights running. Inside everything had gone cold, and was staying cold. He kept that off his face. He was getting better at that than he wanted to be. Scene 3. The drive to Ironwood. He left the house at 2:15 on Thursday afternoon, which gave him 45 minutes for a drive that took 25 on a clear day, because he wanted the time, and because he did not want to arrive early and spend the extra minutes sitting in the Chevette in Ironwood's gravel lot, working himself up about what he was walking into. The Chevette needed gas. He stopped at the station on Route 35, filled it, and paid. For a while after that, the drive was just the drive. The familiar county roads running between fields, greening up on both sides. The kind of April afternoon that could almost convince you it was already May if the temperature didn't drop after 4 o'clock, which it always did. He turned north on Maple Grove Road at the junction by the Rock Bridge. The road changed character north of Rock Bridge the way it always had. He hadn't been on this stretch in 4 years and 1 month, but the change was something he remembered in his body before his mind caught up to it. The fields gave way to tree line on both sides. The road narrowed by a few inches, or seemed to, the way a road seemed to narrow when the canopy started coming in and the light went from open to filtered. It was mid-afternoon, and the sun was still well up, but the quality of the light on Maple Grove Road was different from the quality of the light on the county highway. Cooler and more considered, moving through the new leaves in a way that made patches and gaps rather than a single even brightness. The creak was audible before he reached the bridge. He had forgotten that. Not forgotten, he had not thought about it. Nakin Creek came down from the north and ran under Maple Grove Road at the low crossing, and in April it ran full, and the sound of it reached the road 100 yards before the bridge. He heard it now, the specific sound of moving water over a rock bed, and something in his chest recognized it before the rest of him did. He crossed the bridge. On the other side, the road curved slightly left and then straightened, and ahead of him, the road ran north through the tree corridor for another 300 yards or so before the ironwood entrance came in on the right. He knew the distance without measuring it. He wasn't sure how. He had been on this road maybe a handful of times in his life, but some distances lodged in a person regardless. He did not look at the clock. He kept his eyes on the road and drove at a steady 35, which was the speed the road suggested, and he looked at the tree line on either side, and the road ahead, and the pale April sky above the gap in the canopy. He passed the turnoff. It came in on the right, a quarter-mile south of the Nakin Creek Bridge, a dirt lane running east through the trees toward the hill. He did not look at it. He kept his eyes on the road ahead. The turnoff was in his peripheral vision for the 3 seconds it took to pass it, and then it was behind him. He was almost not looking at it. There was a difference between not looking at a thing and almost not looking at it, and he had learned the difference at some point in the past 4 years, without having had occasion to name it until now. Not looking was what you did when a thing was not there or did not matter. Almost not looking was something else. Almost not looking was what you did when a thing was there and mattered considerably, and you had decided, not without effort, to keep driving. The lane ran east to a hill. He knew the hill. He knew the oak at the top of it, and the tire swing that hung from the lowest branch on the south side, and that nobody touched, that he did not believe anybody touched, that he had not touched since he was 9 years old, and the tree had been younger, and the swing had been a different rope. He knew the shape of the hill against a sky in any season, because the shape was one of the first things a person remembered, and one of the last things a person forgot. He kept his eyes on the road. He drove. The entrance to Ironwood Retreat came in 300 yards past the Nakin Creek Bridge, a gravel drive turning right off Maple Grove Road between 2 cedar posts with no signage, because Ironwood had never needed signage. The guests who found Ironwood were guests who had been looking for it, and the guests who found it without looking, the ones who simply turned down the wrong road in the wrong season, were a different category of arrival that Frank handled as it came. Michael turned between the posts and his tires went from asphalt to gravel, and the sound changed under the car. He had heard that sound before. The specific crunch of Ironwood's gravel, coarser than a driveway gravel. The last time his boots had been on it, he had been 16 years old and walking out of this compound on a Sunday morning, heading back down Maple Grove Road towards Samantha's house. He had walked in Friday thinking he'd be back at her place by supper. He had not been back by supper. The gravel had sounded the same going out as it had going in. That was 1985. He drove it now. The compound opened up at the end of the short drive, the lodge straight ahead and the cabin units flanking it, 5 on each side, the same log construction he remembered, the same iron horseshoes above each door frame. The horseshoes were as he remembered them, black and heavy against the timber above each lintel. He did not look at the one above the lodge door yet. He had been told, at the end of a phone call, that there were things Frank wanted to explain in person. He would look at the lodge door horseshoe when he was standing under it. He parked alongside the lodge. He cut the engine. He sat in the Chevette for a moment. The compound was quiet in a way that was not the same as the quiet of an empty place. He had understood this in 1985 without having the language for it. The hollow around Ironwood was not empty. It was watching, the way it had always been watching, the way the quality of the silence here was not the absence of sound, but a particular presence that existed in place of sound. April had the hollow in a specific state, awake and not quite hungry, the way spring brought things awake that had been still all winter and had not yet remembered what they were awake for. He got out of the car. The air smelled like creek water and new growth. and the specific mineral smell of the limestone outcroppings along the south fence line, a smell he associated completely and without ambiguity with this place and no other. He had not smelled it in 4 years. It hit him the way smells hit a person when they had been away from them long enough, not as a smell exactly, but as a retrieval. Everything associated with the smell arriving at the same time the smell did. He had been a different age every time he'd smelled it. The lodge door opened. Frank Harmon came out onto the porch and stood there, and Michael stopped walking and looked at him. 57 years old. He had been 53 when Michael had last seen him in 1985. Had been 53 and looked it. A man who had been doing physical work in all weather for years, and who carried that in the texture of his face and the set of his shoulders. He was 4 years older now, and he looked it, or he looked something, not older exactly. Something had settled in him in the intervening years that had not been settled before, and Michael was not sure whether settled was the right word for it either. He looked like a man who had made a decision and was living in the aftermath of having made it. He looked at Michael the way he had looked at him in 1985. Reading him the same way Robert Anderson read him, but differently. Robert read for safety, for whether his son was all right. Frank read for something else. He was taking an inventory, moving through what he could see of Michael, revising something he'd carried in his head against what was standing in front of him. Michael walked up to the porch. They shook hands. Frank's hand was the same hand, dry and calloused and unhurried in the grip, the handshake of a man who did not perform handshakes. He held it for a second, and then released it. "Michael," he said. "Frank." Frank looked at him for a moment more. Then he stepped back from the door and said, "Come in. I've got the coffee on." Michael went in. The lodge was the lodge. He stood in the main room and let himself look at it, because looking at it was something he needed to do, and he might as well do it now rather than doing it sideways across the next hour. The main room with its timber walls and the mounted fish above the mantel, and the chairs arranged the way Frank arranged them, which was the way his father had arranged them before him. The fieldstone fireplace with the grate cleared for spring. The round table in the corner where guests signed the register, except there was no register open on it right now, just the surface of the table and 2 chairs. The horseshoe above the lodge door was dead. He had looked at it when he came in, the way he had told himself he would. It was still there, still hung on the nail, still iron in the sense that the material had not changed. But the thing it had been before, whatever quality it had carried that made the horseshoes at Ironwood different from the horseshoes above every barn door in Wawasek County, that was gone. He did not know how he knew that. He had not known he could read that. But he looked at the horseshoe above the lodge door, and what he got from it was absence, the same quality he got from a clock on a wall that had stopped running. Still a clock, no longer keeping time. He looked away from it. Frank was in the kitchen doorway. "Still take it black?" he said. "Yes, sir." He came back with 2 mugs and set them on the table in the corner. He sat. Michael sat across from him. The coffee was the same coffee that Frank had always made at Ironwood, dark and adequate without being anything more than that, and Michael wrapped his hands around the mug, and the warmth of it was steadying in the particular way that warmth was steadying when a person needed something to hold. They sat for a moment. Outside the lodge, the hollow was doing what it did in the afternoon. The creek was running somewhere south of the compound. A bird called twice from the tree line and went quiet. Frank looked at his coffee. Then he looked at Michael. "You look good," Frank said. "Filled out some since 1985. Factory work does that." Frank nodded. "How long you been at Hartwell now?" 14 months. "You mentioned you made crew lead." He had mentioned it on the phone. He had not thought Frank would remember it. He said, "January." Frank wrapped his hands around his own mug the same way Michael had wrapped his. Michael noticed this and did not remark on it. "I owe you an explanation," Frank said. "You don't owe me anything," Michael said. Frank looked at him. One eyebrow moved a fraction. "For the call," Michael said. "I know why you called. I've been waiting for you to call." He paused. "Or something like it. I didn't know it would be you specifically." Frank said, What did you think it would be? Michael considered this. He looked at the mug in his hands. I thought it would come at night. Not a phone call. He looked up. I thought it would come the way it came in 1985, something happening first and then you in the middle of it. Frank was quiet for a moment. That's still possible, he said. I know. Frank set down his mug. He put his hands flat on the table in a way Michael recognized, the gesture of a man who was about to say the thing he had been working up to, who had decided the working up was finished. It came here in October, Frank said, to this room. Michael looked at him. Not the Hollows things, Frank said. Not what you and I dealt with in 1985. The thing underneath all of that. The thing that makes those things. He paused. It walked into this lodge and crossed the threshold and erased the ward above the door, the way you'd wipe something off a chalkboard. Then it left. That was all it did. It came here, and it took the ward apart, and it left. Michael looked at the horseshoe above the door. He looked back at Frank. It was telling you something, Michael said. Frank held his gaze. Yes. What was it telling you? That the tools I've been using on the things it makes don't work on it directly. That it can enter this space any time it chooses. That what my father built here, and what I've been maintaining here for 30 years, is real enough in its way, but it is not built for what made the hollow. He paused. And that it knows about you, that whatever has been in motion since your family was on the old property, that hasn't resolved. It's been waiting, it's been recovering, and it's done with both of those things now. The kitchen was very quiet. Michael sat with this. He did not rush the sitting with it. He said, "What does it want?" Frank looked at him. Something moved in Frank's face, brief and controlled. You, he said. Specifically you. Not your family. Not the county. You. He picked up his mug. I don't fully understand why yet. I have a piece of it. Harold has more. At the mention of Harold's name, Michael looked toward the interior of the lodge, the hallway that led back to the study and the other rooms, the parts of the lodge he could not see from where he was sitting. Harold's here, Frank said. It was not a question. He's been here since November, Frank said. He's in the back. I wanted to talk to you first. Michael looked at Frank. Before I go back there, Michael said, there's something I need to tell you. Frank was still. My mother has been having a dream, Michael said. Same dream, 3 nights. Something in the yard along the fence line. Started Friday. He paused. My father has been getting up in the night. He says something was in the yard. He went out the second night, and it was gone when he hit the porch light. But before the light, he said, the shape of it was upright. He kept his voice even. He said it the way his father had said it. As a man reporting facts he was not entirely certain of the classification of. He watched Frank while he said it. Frank's expression shifted. It was a small shift, but Michael was watching for it, and he caught it. Something left Frank's face that had been there a moment before. A kind of containment. The careful managed steadiness that Frank Harmon brought to everything. To guests in crisis. To things at the fence line at night. To 4 years of keeping a watch alone. That steadiness dropped a fraction in the moment after Michael said, upright. And what was underneath it was concern. Not the managed kind. The kind that sat in a man's eyes when the thing he had been afraid of had arrived. It was the first time Michael had ever seen Frank's face do that. Frank said, when did your father first see it? Monday night. Tuesday night again. Both nights after dark. Yes. Same location in the yard. He said the grass was pressed down in the same spot. Frank was looking at the table. He was looking at the table with the eyes of a man who was doing arithmetic in his head and not finding the answer he wanted. Frank, Michael said. Frank looked up. Tell me what that means, Michael said. Frank looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up his mug and stood from the table. Let me get Harold, he said. Scene 4. Frank. Frank went down the hall. Michael sat at the table and listened to his footsteps go back through the lodge, the specific sound of Frank Harmon's boots on the plank floor, unhurried and deliberate in the way everything Frank did was unhurried and deliberate, even now. Even with the news Michael had just laid on the table between them like something he'd found in the yard and didn't know what to do with. He looked at the horseshoe above the door. He had looked at it when he came in. He was looking at it again now, because he wanted to understand what he was reading from it, and whether the reading was real or whether he was making it real by deciding it was. He had done that before. He had been 16 and frightened in this room, and had made things into things they weren't, because frightened people did that. He was 20 now, and not frightened in the same way, and the reading he was getting from the horseshoe was not the product of deciding to get it. It was there or it wasn't. It was there. The absence was there, the nothing where something had been. He looked away. He looked at the room, the mounted fish, the fieldstone fireplace, the register table. He looked at the chair he was sitting in and tried to remember whether he had sat in this chair in 1985 and could not. The chairs had not moved. He knew that without knowing how he knew it. Frank did not move things without reason. He thought about his father's face at the kitchen table on Wednesday night. He thought about the shape his father had seen in the yard, upright, in the grass along the fence line, twice. He thought about the slip of paper on the telephone table in the hall, his mother's handwriting. He put his hands around the coffee mug and was still. Footsteps in the hall. 2 sets. The man who came through the doorway first was Frank. The man behind him was someone Michael had not seen since he was 10 years old. Frank had aged 4 years older than 1985, and it showed, the way it showed on anyone time was working on normally. The man behind him had not aged, at all. He looked exactly, not approximately, not close to, exactly the way he had looked the night he had pulled his station wagon up the driveway through the snow and climbed out into the blizzard with his coat open and his breath barely fogging in the cold. Michael stood up. He did not decide to stand up. He was sitting, and then he was standing, which was what a person's body did when it encountered something that warranted it. Harold McKinnon stood in the doorway of the Ironwood Lodge and looked at Michael Anderson across 11 years, and whatever distance existed between a 9-year-old boy sitting at a kitchen table with a mug of hot chocolate he couldn't taste, and a 20-year-old man standing in a chair by a round table with a cup of black coffee going cool in his hands. Harold looked exactly the same. This was not a figure of speech. This was not the way people said that someone looked the same, meaning they had aged well, or that their general impression had not altered. He looked the same, the way a stone looked the same from one decade to the next, not because nothing had happened to it, but because whatever had happened to it was not the kind of thing that registered on the surface. The same face, the same quality of stillness in it. The same way of being in a room that made the room seem like the room had been arranged around him, rather than the other way around. He was not wearing a coat. He was wearing a flannel shirt over a t-shirt. The April afternoon outside was 48 degrees. Michael stood there and absorbed this. Harold looked at him. Not the way Frank looked at him. Frank's look was an inventory, careful and professional, the look of a man revising a prior estimate. Harold's look was something else, quieter, the way a person looked at something they had been keeping track of from a distance for a long time and were now seeing close up for the first time in a while. There was nothing in it that was not kind. A sound came out of Michael's chest. It was not quite a laugh. It was the sound a person made when they had been holding something very tightly for a very long time, and something in the room gave them permission to set it down for 1 second. He brought one hand up and pressed it against his mouth and held the sound in. He closed his eyes. He opened them. Harold was still there. "Mr. McKinnon," Michael said. Harold said, "Michael." He said it the way he had said it at the kitchen table 11 years ago, at Margaret's house with the snow still coming down outside and the rest of Michael's family in the other room, and Michael sitting in front of a mug of hot chocolate with his hands wrapped around it and not tasting any of it. The same tone, the same weight in it. Not the weight of pity, the weight of attention, of being looked at by someone that saw clearly and was not going to look away. Michael swallowed. He said, "You look exactly the same." Harold considered this as if it were a factual observation requiring consideration. "You don't," Harold said. "No." "That's appropriate," Harold said. "Sit down, Michael." Michael sat down. Harold took the chair across the table and Frank pulled a third chair from against the wall, and they sat, the three of them, around the corner of the round table. Frank's coffee was where he'd left it. Harold did not have coffee. Frank had not brought him any, and Harold had not asked for any, and Michael filed this without knowing yet what to do with it. Frank looked at Michael. "I want to go back to what you told me," Frank said. "Your parents. I want to make sure I have the full picture." "You have what I know." "Your mother's dream. 3 nights, starting Friday." "Yes." "And your father, Monday night and Tuesday night." "Yes. He said it was in the same spot both times." "The grass was down in the same spot when he looked in the morning." Frank nodded. He was looking at the table again, the same way he'd looked at the table before he'd gone to get Harold, doing arithmetic. "Frank," Michael said. Frank looked up. "Stop doing that," Michael said. "I'm not 16. Tell me what it means." Frank looked at him. The fraction of something moved in his expression, not displeasure. The opposite. He looked at Michael the way a man looked at something that had confirmed an expectation he'd had for a while, but hadn't been certain of. He said, "It means the dark entity is mapping the people." He said it flat. The way he said things when he had decided that the straight way was the only useful way. Not to hurt them. Not yet. It's learning where they are, what they do, where they go and when. It's been reading the geography of your ordinary life since early March. The house, the church, the factory road. He paused. "Roy Chandler, you remember me mentioning Harold's man in town? The funeral director. Roy has been tracking reports coming into his office from around that area. Strange dreams, feelings of being watched, animals behaving wrong. He plotted them on a map. The center of the pattern is 1/2 a mile west of your house on Walnut Street." Another pause. "The pattern started forming in early March, and it has been tightening toward the center since." Michael sat with this. The hollow was quiet outside. A light wind moved through the tree line, the sound of it just reaching the lodge. "It's not ready to move on me directly," Michael said. "Not yet. It's building first." "Yes." "Why?" He said it as a statement, not a question. He was thinking out loud the way he thought out loud when he was working through a problem on the finishing line, the specific forward-moving quality of a mind that was not going to stop at the edge of a thing it didn't like. Frank looked at him. He said, "We have thoughts on that. I want to hear yours." Michael looked at the table. He thought about what he knew, what he had known since he was 10 years old and had understood better at 16 and had been carrying for 4 years since, the accumulated weight of a thing he had not been able to put down or tell anyone about. He said, "At the farm it came for the whole family, my father, my uncle, all of us." He paused. "It didn't get what it wanted. My uncle died, but the rest of us got out. Whatever it came for didn't happen." He looked up. "So it knows that a direct approach on a whole family doesn't work the way it wants. It costs it." He paused. "It's going to do it differently this time. It's going to know exactly where everyone is and what they mean to me and what it can use before it moves, so that when it does move, I'm already surrounded." He stopped. The table was quiet. Harold was looking at him. Frank was looking at him. Frank's expression had done the thing again, the containment dropping a fraction, what was underneath it visible briefly before he got it back. "That's right," Frank said. "Most of it," Harold said. Michael looked at Harold. "The one piece you're missing," Harold said, "is that it's not doing this because the direct approach failed at the farmhouse. It's doing this because you're not what you were at the farmhouse. It knows the difference. At 10 years old, it came for your family, and you survived it. At 16, it came for you and Frank, and you held." He paused. He said the next thing with the same evenness as everything else he said, which was the only register he seemed to have. "It is moving carefully, because it is not certain it can take you the way it could take most things. It is making sure before it commits." Michael looked at him. He said, "That should probably be more reassuring than it is." Harold said, "Yes, because what it means is that when it does move, it's going to move with everything it has." "Yes," Harold said again. The wind went through the tree line outside. The creek ran somewhere south of the compound, steady and low. Frank said, "There's more, but I want to come back to your parents." Michael looked at him. Frank said, "Your mother's dream, the shape in the yard, that's not surveillance from a distance, that's direct contact. The pattern Roy mapped is the dark entity reading the geography of your life from the outside. This is different. This is dark entity putting itself inside that geography, inside the fence line. He said it carefully, precisely, the way he said things that required precision. Michael sat with it. He said, "It's inside the fence line, but it's not doing anything. Not yet. It's making sure they know it's there." Frank said, "It may not be making sure they know. It may be making sure you know. Your mother told you about the dream. Your father told you about the shape in the yard. The dark entity has been in this work a long time. It knows how families communicate." Michael looked at the table. He looked at the horseshoe above the door. He looked at Frank. "My parents don't know what any of this is," he said. "They built their life back. They moved 3 times, and they settled on Walnut Street, and they go to church, and my father goes to work, and they don't talk about." He stopped himself. He was quiet for a moment. "They don't talk about the farmhouse. They have not talked about the farmhouse in years. What happens to them if this gets to them directly?" Frank did not answer immediately. It was not a hesitation. Frank Harmon did not hesitate. It was the pause of a man who was selecting the true thing out of all the things he could say. "Your mother has faith," Frank said. "Real faith, the kind that holds. I don't know your father as well as I know some things, but I know he stood up in that farmhouse for his family in 1977 and 1978, and I know he's been standing up in one way or another ever since. What happens to people like that when the darkness comes directly is not the same as what happens to other people." He paused. "That doesn't mean it won't cost them." Michael was quiet. He was thinking about his mother at the stove with her back carefully to him, placing each word where it belonged. His father looking at the lemon cake. His father at the kitchen table, looking at Michael across the distance of 2 men who were both doing the same thing, and both knew the other man was doing it, and neither of them could say so. He said, "I need to know what we're going to do about them." "Yes," Frank said. "Not eventually, now, before anything else. They're in it whether they know it or not, and not knowing doesn't protect them." Frank looked at Harold. Harold looked at Frank. Something passed between them that Michael did not have the vocabulary for yet. A communication of the kind that happened between 2 people who had been working the same problem from different angles for long enough that the angles had become legible to each other. Frank said, "That's what we're going to talk about, all 3 of us, tonight." He put his hands flat on the table. "But first, I want you to understand what we're dealing with, what it is, what it can do, what it cannot do, and where we are in the larger picture. Then we talk about your parents. Then we talk about what comes next." He looked at Michael steadily. "Can you give me that order?" It was not quite a question. Michael looked at him. He thought about the fence line, about his mother's coffee cup turning in her hands, about his father's voice saying it was probably an animal in the tone of a man who knew that wasn't what it was. "Yes," he said. Frank nodded once. He picked up his coffee mug. He began. Scene 5. Harold. Frank talked for 40 minutes. He talked the way Frank did everything. Methodically, without ornament, covering the ground in the order it needed covering. He started with October and the dead horseshoe and worked forward through the winter. What he and Harold had mapped along the Nakin Creek corridor. What the Hollow's behavior had been across the cold months. The specific changes in frequency and character that Frank had been logging since 1978, and which had shifted in October in a way that was distinct from any prior shift in the record. What Roy's notebook showed. The geographic pattern. The church. He did not editorialize. He laid the information down like a man laying boards across a gap, plank by plank, and let Michael walk across it. Michael listened. He asked 3 questions. Where exactly was the center of Roy's circle? Whether the dark entity's pattern was moving or static? Whether the ward at the south fence line was still holding, or whether that had gone the way of the one above the door? Frank answered each one. The center was a half-mile west of Walnut Street, the Cooper property, vacant these past 6 years. The pattern was tightening, not moving. It was contracting toward the center the way a fist contracted, slowly, with patience. The south fence ward was holding. But Harold had read it in a way Frank had not been able to before Harold arrived, and what Harold had read was that it was holding, in the sense that a thing was holding when the pressure against it had not yet reached the threshold. Not because the pressure was low. Michael was quiet for a moment after that one. Then he said, "What's the threshold?" Frank looked at Harold. Harold said, "We don't know exactly. What we know is that the ward was built for the Hollow's creatures. It was built for what the Hollow produces. It was not built for what produces the Hollow." Michael nodded. He had already understood that from what Frank had told him earlier. He was confirming it, making sure the edges of it were where he thought they were. He asked a fourth question, the one that had been sitting under the other three since Frank had started talking. "The mailman," Michael said. "The figure in the postal uniform, is that the dark entity directly, or is that something it's wearing?" Frank and Harold looked at each other. It was the question Frank had not expected. Michael could see that. Frank's expression did not change the way it changed when he was surprised. Frank Harmon had not been visibly surprised by anything in a long time, and was not going to start now, but there was a quality of adjustment in him, a slight recalibration, the look of a man who had been prepared for a certain range of questions and had just received one that sat at the far edge of the range. Harold said, "It is the dark entity directly. The uniform is not a separate thing. It is the form the dark entity chooses when it wants to be seen as something almost human. It absorbed a human consciousness more than a century ago. What it learned from that absorption is how to wear the shape of a person, not convincingly, not to someone who is paying attention, but from a distance, in the moment before attention focuses, it is enough. It's not trying to fool me," Michael said. "It knows I know what it is." "No," Harold said, "it's not trying to fool you." "Then why the uniform?" Harold looked at him with the quality of attention that was his particular quality, the look that saw clearly and did not look away. "Because it wants you to know it is there," Harold said. "Not the Hollow's creatures, not something produced by the geography. It, specifically, wearing its face." Michael sat with this. The afternoon light had moved since they'd sat down, the sun getting lower outside the lodge windows, the light going from mid-afternoon white to the beginning of the long gold that came before evening in April. The Hollow was doing what the Hollow did. The creek ran south of the compound. The tree line was still. He looked at Harold. He had been not looking at Harold for the past 40 minutes, the way he had been almost not looking at the farmhouse turnoff on the drive-in. Keeping his attention on Frank and the information and the forward movement of understanding what he was dealing with, because that was the task, and it required full attention. And what would happen when he turned his full attention to Harold McKinnon was a thing he had been putting off since Harold walked through the doorway. He stopped putting it off. He looked at Harold directly. Harold was watching him with the same quality of stillness he had brought to the doorway, to the chair, to every moment of the past 40 minutes. He sat in the chair at the round table, and he had not shifted his position once in 40 minutes, had not reached for coffee he didn't have, had not crossed or uncrossed his legs, had not done any of the small continuous adjustments that people made in chairs when they had been sitting in them for 40 minutes. He sat the way a stone sat, present, unhurried, entirely without the restlessness that living in a body over time produced in most people. He looked exactly the same as the night of the blizzard in 1978. Michael had been 9 years old. His family had been in that farmhouse without heat or electricity for 3 days, and the thing in the farmhouse had been getting closer to whatever it had been building toward, and his grandfather and his father had been moving the family out the back door toward the propane camper in the yard when the headlights had come up the driveway through the snow. An older station wagon, the kind with the long hood and the bench seat, pushing through drifts that should have stopped it. The headlights sweeping the yard and the snow. Harold had climbed out in the blizzard and helped get the family into the car. Michael had been in the back seat between his mother and his grandmother. He had watched through the rear window as his father and grandfather helped get everyone in, and then his father had climbed in, and Harold had gotten back behind the wheel and driven them down Maple Grove Road through the snow. He had driven them to a house a few miles down the road. Margaret had had the lights on and the kitchen warm. Michael had sat at the kitchen table in a coat that was still wet from the 3 steps between the car and the door, and Margaret had put hot chocolate in front of him, and he had wrapped his hands around the mug and not tasted any of it. Harold had sat down across from him. He had looked at Michael with the same quality of attention he was bringing to this room right now, 11 years later, the same face, the same stillness in it. He had looked at Michael the way a person looked at a thing they were taking a careful accounting of, and Michael had sat across from him in a wet coat at a kitchen table at 2 a.m. in the middle of a blizzard, and had met that look and held it, because he was 9 years old and frightened and cold, and he had stayed with his family the whole time, and he had not run, and whatever Harold saw in him when he looked, Harold had seen it then. Harold had said, "You did right, staying with your family." To a 10-year-old it had landed as what it appeared to be, reassurance. You held together, you didn't run, you stayed close. Good. That was all. Michael was 20 years old now. He was sitting in the Ironwood Lodge in April 1989, with 11 years between himself and that kitchen table, and Frank Harmon had just spent 40 minutes explaining to him that the thing in the farmhouse was a demon, that it hunted through the attachments between people, that its strategy was to map and then isolate and then move, and that the specific mechanism of its approach was always the same. It came for what you loved. It worked through what you loved. It used the people you were attached to as the geography of the attack. Staying with your family was not sentiment. It was the correct tactical response to something that hunted through attachment. You did not give it the geometry it needed. You kept the people close. You stayed between them and what was coming. You did not give it the separated pieces. It was the first piece of guardian knowledge Harold McKinnon had ever passed to him. He had been 9 years old. He had not known what he was receiving. Michael sat at the table in the Ironwood Lodge and looked at Harold McKinnon, and the weight of the 11 years between that kitchen table and this one settled on him all at once, not heavily, not with grief, but with the specific gravity of something that had been true for a long time and had just become fully visible. His throat was tight. He did not let it into his voice. He said, "You said that to me, at Margaret's kitchen table, after the blizzard." Harold said, "I remember. You did right, staying with your family." Michael said it carefully. He was not asking whether Harold had said it. He knew Harold had said it. He was repeating it because he needed to hear it in the room they were in now, with Frank sitting beside them, and the dead horseshoe above the door and the hollow awake outside, and everything that had happened in the 11 years since laid out on the table between them. "I thought you meant I'd been brave. That I hadn't panicked," Harold said. "You had been brave. You hadn't panicked." "But that's not what you meant," Harold looked at him. "No," Harold said. "It's not the only thing I meant." The room was quiet. Frank was looking at the table, not in the arithmetic way, in the way of a man who was present in a moment that did not belong to him and was giving it the space it required. Michael looked at Harold for a long moment. He said, "How long have you been watching?" "Since 1978, Harold said. "Since that night." "All this time." "I kept my distance," Harold said. "Watching from a distance is not the same as being present. I was not present in your life. I kept track of it. There is a difference, and I want to be accurate about it." Michael nodded. He looked at the table. He looked up. "You wrote to Frank after the zombie siege," he said. "March 1985. Harold said, "Yes." Frank didn't write back. He said it without accusation. He was not building a case. He was laying out the timeline the way Frank had laid out the information earlier, plank by plank. Frank said, "No, I didn't." He said it with the directness of a man who had made an error and was not going to dress it as anything else. "I should have. I knew what you were from what you did in 1985, and I knew what was coming eventually, and I told myself I was waiting until I had something concrete to give you. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about the timing." He paused. "I'm sorry, Michael." Michael looked at him. He said, "You're telling me now?" "Yes. Then we're all right," He meant it. He could hear that he meant it. Frank heard it too. Something in Frank's posture shifted slightly. The specific release of a weight that had been held a long time. Michael looked back at Harold. He said, "What do I need to know about staying with my family? What does it mean to do that right now, in 1989, with whatever is coming?" Harold looked at him for a moment. "It means," Harold said, "that when it forces a choice between the people behind you and the thing in front of you, you do not move toward the thing at the cost of the people. Rang. It knows you will move toward it. It is counting on you to move toward it. The ancient and the malicious are patient. They let the brave come to them." He paused. "What you did at 9 years old, without knowing you were doing it, staying with your family, not separating from them, was correct. What you will have to do before this is finished will require the same principle at a larger scale. Staying with your family is not a passive thing. It is the active thing. It is the work." Michael sat with this. The afternoon light had shifted again. The hollow outside was still. The creek ran. He said, "There are people in my life right now, besides my parents." He said it because it needed to be said. Because Quinn Sinclair sat in the back pew at First Methodist on Sunday mornings with her family, and because the church had been touched, and because the dark entity was building a map of everything Michael Anderson loved. Harold said, "We know. Are they in the pattern?" "Yes," Harold said. "The Sinclair family is in the pattern." Michael was quiet. "What does that mean for them right now?" he said. "Right now it means they are inside the geography the dark entity is reading," Harold said. "It means they are part of the catalogue. It does not yet mean they are targets in the sense of direct approach. The catalogue is not yet complete. When the catalogue is complete, the approach will change." He paused. "You have time. Not unlimited time. Time." Michael nodded. He thought about Quinn at the drive-in. The moment he had opened his mouth and closed it and said "never mind," taking the out with both hands, relieved and ashamed of the relief. He was not going to be able to say "never mind" much longer. He knew that. He looked at Frank. He looked at Harold. Two men who had been holding lines alone in the dark for years. One of them, since before Maple Grove Road, had a name, and he was sitting at a table with both of them in April 1989. And whatever was coming, regardless of what he did next. And the only question was what shape next was going to take. He said, "All right. Tell me the rest of it." Harold looked at Frank. Frank looked at his maps, which were not on the table but which were in the study, and which Michael was going to see before the evening was done. Frank said, "Let's start with what the cave system is and where it goes." Scene 6. What they know. The maps were in the study. Frank spread them on the desk the way he had spread them for Harold in November. The county map first, then the corridor map, then the hand-drawn overlay he had built across the winter from 10 years of logs and Harold's knowledge and Roy's notebook. Michael stood on the other side of the desk and looked at them. The county map had marks on it, small dots in blue ink, Roy's work, the pattern visible even before Frank explained it. Michael looked at it and found Walnut Street without being told where it was, and found the cluster of dots around it, and found the center point half a mile west, and traced the outer edge of the pattern with his eye, the way you trace the edge of something, to understand its size. It was larger than he had expected. It reached the factory road. It reached the church. It reached the Sinclair house on the county road west of town, a dot sitting there in blue ink like a period at the end of a sentence. He did not say anything about the Sinclair dot. He looked at it and moved on. Frank pointed to the corridor map. "The cave system runs under the Nakin Creek bed from somewhere north of here. We haven't reached the northern end yet, south to a point below the Barlow property. That's 10 miles up this road." He tapped the map. "The old Barlow farm, the property where your family was before the farmhouse, before 1977. Michael looked at the map. "I know the Barlow property," he said. "I know you do," Frank said. "What you may not know is what's under it. The cave system is not natural. It follows the creek bed, but it predates any survey of this county, and Harold believes it predates this county by a considerable margin. It's been there since before Jacob Barlow found the entrance in the 1880s, and did what he did with it." He paused. Jacob Barlow is where the dark entity's connection to this geography originates. He found the entrance. He used what he found there. The dark entity absorbed him, his consciousness, his knowledge of this land, his human psychology, and has been operating from that anchor point along the Naking Creek corridor ever since. Michael looked at the map. He said, "It knows this county. It knows this county the way a man knows a house he built himself," Frank said. "It knows where every room is. It knows which boards creak, which means it knew our family was moving to the Barlow property before we even moved in." Frank said, "Yes. It was already watching us. Yes." Michael was quiet. He had not known that. He had known the dark entity from the farmhouse forward, from 1977 forward, from the night the sound started in the walls, and the dark began doing what it did to his family. He had not known there was a before. He was standing at the desk in the ironwood study, looking at a map that told him the before had always been there, that the farmhouse had not been the beginning of the story, that the family had been in the story before they knew it existed. He said, "My father looked at ironwood units before they took the farmhouse." Frank was still. "He brought me out here when I was 8, Michael said. "Before we moved down from Columbus, I ran on the gravel drive." He looked up. "You were here." Frank looked at him steadily. "I was here," Frank said. "You met my father." "Once," Frank said. 20 minutes, spring of 1977. "You never told me that." "No." Michael looked at him. He was not angry. He was not sure yet what he was, or whether it required a name. He said, "Why not?" Frank said, "Because it wasn't mine to put in front of you. The fact that I liked your father in 20 minutes of conversation in 1977 and never saw him again is not information that helps you with what you're dealing with. It's a thing I carry. I didn't see a reason to hand it to you." Michael looked at him for a moment. He nodded once. He looked back at the map. "The cave system," he said. "Where does it go from here north?" "That's what we've been working on this winter," Frank said. Harold and I walked the creek corridor south to north, from the ironwood fence line up. We got 4 miles before the terrain required equipment we didn't have. We know it runs north toward the Barlow property. We believe the Barlow property is where the anchor point is, the source. He paused. What we don't know yet is the exact location of the entrance, or what condition the anchor point is in, or what we're going to find when we get there. But that's where it ends. Michael said, "Whatever ends it, it ends there." Frank looked at Harold. Harold said, "Yes." Michael was quiet for a moment. He said, "What does it look like? The dark entity, not the mailman, what it actually is." Harold said, "You've seen the mailman." "That's the wearing. I'm asking about underneath the wearing." Harold looked at him. He said, "Writhing darkness, limbs that are too long and bend in the wrong direction at every joint. Eyes that are not eyes, clusters of absence where eyes would be on something with a right to them. Multiple mouths, black ichor where it moves across a surface." He said it with the evenness of a man reading from a list. "It is not a shape that the human mind accepts without cost. The seeing of it produces a specific kind of damage that is not physical and does not heal quickly. Frank has seen it. I have seen it many times. You have not seen it yet." "Yet," Michael said. "Yet," Harold said. Michael nodded. "What hurts it?" he said. Frank said, "Iron, properly placed, stops the Hollow's creatures. It does not stop the dark entity directly. The ward above this door was proof of that." He paused. "Running water slows it. The creek is part of why ironwood has held as long as it has. Beyond that," he looked at Harold. Harold said, "The old knowledge, what your grandfather carried, what his people carried before him, from before the European names were on this land. Your grandfather used it in the farmhouse in 1978 without knowing fully what he was using. It is why your family got out." He paused. "The Guardian lineage has pieces of it. I have more pieces. There are pieces neither of us has yet, that are at the Barlow property, that Jacob Barlow and the dark entity together buried so deeply in the anchor point that nothing has retrieved them in 100 years. Michael said, "We're going to need them." "Yes," Harold said, "which means we're going to the Barlow property." "Eventually," Frank said. "Not yet. Not until we know more about what we're walking into." Michael looked at the map. He looked at the corridor running north from Ironwood along the creek bed to the Barlow property 10 miles up. He looked at the Sinclair dot on the county map. He looked at the cluster around Walnut Street. He said, the people in that pattern, my parents, the Sinclairs, the people at the church, what do I tell them? Frank said, nothing yet. Michael looked at him. I know, Frank said. I know what you're thinking. They're in it without their knowledge, and their knowledge doesn't protect them, but their ignorance does have a cost. He held Michael's look. The cost of telling them without enough to give them, without something they can do with the information, is higher than the cost of waiting until we have something concrete. I made that error with you in 1985. I told you something is coming, and I didn't give you enough to act on. You carried it for 4 years. This is different, Michael said. How? In 1985 you were talking to me. I can carry something alone for 4 years. My parents can't. They're already in it. They're having dreams and seeing shapes in the yard, and they're talking to each other in a kitchen at 10 at night, and neither one of them is saying what they're actually thinking. He paused. That's already a cost. The cost isn't going up when I tell them. The cost is already running. The study was quiet. Frank looked at Harold. Harold said nothing. He was watching Michael with the clear, steady attention that was his only mode. Frank looked at the map for a long moment. He said, what would you tell them? Not everything, Michael said. Not the cave system. Not the Barlow property. Not what Harold is. He thought about his father at the kitchen table on Wednesday night, and the look Robert Anderson had given him across the distance of 2 men running the same deflection at each other. I'd tell them enough so that they stop carrying it alone in separate rooms. I'd tell them what they're seeing is real. I'd tell them it's connected to what happened on the old property. I'd tell them there are people working on it, and I'm one of them. He paused. My father has been waiting for someone to tell him that for 11 years. I can see it on him. Nobody spoke. The hollow was very quiet outside. The evening was coming in through the study window, the light going from gold to the first thin grey of dusk, the tree line to the east going dark at the edges, while the sky above it was still pale. Harold said, Frank. Frank looked at him. Harold said nothing else. He did not need to. Something in the single word and the look that accompanied it was a full sentence, and Frank heard it. Frank looked at Michael. He said, before you talk to your parents, come back here. We go over what you're going to say. What you tell them needs to be accurate, and it needs to be shaped so it gives them something to do, rather than just something to fear. He paused. Not because I don't trust your judgment. Because this conversation with your parents is the first time the truth enters their house in 11 years, and it needs to go in right. Michael said, yes. He meant it without reservation. One more thing, Michael said. Frank waited. I have a question, Michael said, and I need you to tell me if you don't know the answer, rather than giving me the closest thing to an answer you have. Frank said, all right. Can it be stopped, Michael said. Not slowed, not held back, stopped permanently. Frank looked at Harold. Harold looked at Michael. Harold said, yes. He said it without qualification or pause. Not the way a man said yes when he was offering hope. The way a man said yes when he was reporting a fact. How? Michael said. Harold said, the anchor point at the Barlow property, the old knowledge, the pieces neither of us have yet, all of it together. He paused. The dark entity cannot be killed. What can be done, what the old knowledge was built to do, is to strip it of its power and seal it in a place it cannot think or wait or work its way out of. Not dead. Permanent. Michael sat with this. He said, has it been done before? Not to this one, Harold said. To others in other places, by people who paid the full cost of doing it. He paused. The cost is real. I want you to understand that now, before you have to know it in the moment when it matters. The cost is real, and it is paid in people, and not everyone who goes into this comes out of it the way they went in. The study was very quiet. Michael looked at his hands on the edge of the desk, the hands of a factory worker, calloused and specific, with the faint chemical stain along the side of his right index finger that the finishing compound left, and that didn't fully wash out. His grandmother Mary's cross was at his throat. The slight weight of it he had stopped feeling most days. He felt it now. He said, I understand. Harold looked at him. He said, You did right, staying with your family. He said it the same way he had said it in 1978, and the same way he had said it 20 minutes ago when Michael had brought it back into the room. Flat and clear and weighted with the specific gravity of a thing that was true and had always been true and would continue to be true when everything else about the situation changed. Michael looked at him. He said, "I know." He meant the 1978 version. He meant the 1989 version. He meant the version that was waiting further down the road that he couldn't see yet. He meant all of it, simultaneously, the way a person meant the full stack of a thing when they finally understood what the thing was. Harold nodded once. Frank stood. "I'll put more coffee on." He was in the kitchen when it hit. 8:47. Michael had heard the siren before, once, on the Saturday night of the zombie siege in 1985, from inside the lodge, with every window boarded, and Frank at the door with the axe handle. He had heard it, and not had room to process it, because there had been other things requiring processing. He had filed it away as one more piece of the Hollow's machinery, and had not thought about it again in 4 years. He thought about it now. The sound came through the lodge walls, the way it always came through the lodge walls. Muffled, but not diminished. A long mechanical wail that started low and climbed and seemed to find the frequency a human chest cavity could not ignore. It vibrated in his sternum. It moved through the coffee mug in his hands. He went still. Frank came in from the kitchen with 2 mugs and set them on the table without looking up. Harold did not move at all. He sat where he had been sitting and looked at nothing in particular while the siren ran its cycle, the long climb and the longer descent, the mechanical voice of a building that had been doing this every night since before Frank's father put the first cedar post in the ground. Then it stopped. The hollow went quiet. Michael set his mug down carefully. Frank sat. Neither of them said anything about the siren. Neither of them needed to. Frank had heard it 4,000 times. Harold had heard it longer than that. Michael had heard it twice. He picked up his mug. "All right," he said. "Show me the maps." Michael drove home in the dark. He drove south down Maple Grove Road with the Chevette's headlights cutting the corridor between the tree lines and the April dark closing in from both sides. And the creek was invisible below the bridge when he crossed it, but he could hear it, the sound of running water over rock coming up through the open 1/4 inch of window he kept open on drives, because the Chevette ran warm. He passed the turnoff. He looked at it this time. The lane ran east through the dark into the trees, and the hill was up there somewhere, invisible in the night, and the oak was up there, and the tire swing was up there, and the thing that had put itself in his parents' yard 2 nights running, and had touched the church, and had read Quinn Sinclair sitting in the back pew of First Methodist, and had been building its catalogue since early March, was somewhere in the geography of everything he had just driven away from. Recovering, patient, malicious, waiting to be certain before it moved. He looked at the turnoff. He drove past it. He turned south onto the county highway at Rock Bridge, and the trees opened up and the fields ran out on both sides in the dark, and the country station out of Chillicothe came in on the radio, and he left it there because his father listened to it and because some habits were load-bearing. He drove home. He pulled into the driveway on Walnut Street and cut the engine and sat in the Chevette for a moment. The house had its lights on. The kitchen light and the living room light and his parents' bedroom light upstairs, the ordinary lights of a house where people were going about an ordinary evening. Through the living room window, he could see the blue flicker of the television. His father would be in his chair with the newspaper. His mother would be on the couch with whatever she was reading. In 45 minutes, his father would go upstairs, and his mother would follow, and the lights would go off one by one. He sat in the car and looked at the house. He thought about what Harold had said. The cost is real, and it is paid in people. He thought about his father, standing on the back porch 2 nights running, looking at the shape in the yard, not saying what he thought it was, going back inside and lying in the dark. He thought about his mother turning her coffee cup. He thought about Quinn in the back pew. He thought about Frank saying, "The conversation with your parents is the first time the truth enters their house in 11 years, and it needs to go in right." He got out of the car. He went inside. His mother looked up from the couch. "How was the drive?" she said. "Good," he said. Roads were clear. She looked at him for a moment. The careful way she looked at things, he met it. "You hungry?" she said. "I ate at Ironwood," he said. She nodded. He went to the kitchen and got a glass of water and stood at the sink and drank it, and looked out the kitchen window at the side yard in the dark, at the bird feeder on its shepherd's hook, at the cedar fence line running along the back of the property, at the ordinary dark of an ordinary April night in a yard that was no longer only those things. He set the glass down. He stood at the sink for a moment longer. He thought about Frank's condition. "Come back here first. We go over what you're going to say." He had agreed to that without reservation, and he had meant it. His father was 20 feet away in a chair with a newspaper, and his mother was on the couch, and the conversation was right there, on the other side of the kitchen wall, available. He was not going to have it tonight. He had made an agreement, and he was going to keep it, not because Frank had asked him to, but because Frank had been right. 11 years of silence deserved better than whatever came out of his mouth at 9:30 on a Thursday night after 4 hours at Ironwood. His parents deserved the shaped version, the version that gave them something to hold rather than just something to fear. He could wait 1 more week. He set the glass in the sink. He went to the living room doorway. His father looked up from the newspaper. His mother looked up from her book. Michael said, "Just wanted to say good night." His father looked at him for a moment with the specific quality of attention Michael had learned to recognize, the one that had been in his face since October, reading him, checking the edges. "Good night, son," his father said. His mother said, "Sleep well." He went upstairs. He lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling and listened to the house settle around him and thought about everything that was going to have to happen before this was finished, and the cost that was real and paid in people, and the conversation he was going to have with his parents in 1 week when he had done it right. He thought about Quinn in the back pew on Sunday morning. He thought about the oak on the hill and the tire swing nobody touched. He thought about Harold's voice. "You did right, staying with your family." He knew. He closed his eyes.